Welcome and thank you so much for joining us. I'm joined by Jason Barke. He's the Deputy Associate Director for Strategic Workforce Planning and Employee Services at the Office of Personnel Management. Jason, thank you so much for joining me today.
Absolutely, Drew. Glad to be here.
Great. And, something that has been really top of mind for federal employees is this idea of the future of work. And I know that back in March, OPM released some guidance on what that's going to look like for the federal workforce. It sees the federal workforce as one that is inclusive, agile, and engaged with the right skills to enable mission delivery. So with all of that going on, and then at the same time, you have this really big focus on the role of hybrid work in the federal government. How do you see that vision from OPM fitting with the role of hybrid work as well?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. We're really excited when we released that guidance back in March. It really laid out a nice foundation for OPM and federal government where we were thinking about going with the future of the work or the future of the workforce as we think about really our lane and where we're at as far as OPM. And so we really see those three pillars fitting nicely into a hybrid work environment. I could touch on, each one quickly if that's okay, and kind of show you how they fit in there a little bit. So we start with inclusive. So really an inclusive environment, as we think about it, is really where everyone is welcome. Anyone can see themselves working for the federal government. And we think about that, how do we do that? Well, the government is an attractive place to work, no matter your background, education level, location, other factors that sometimes could limit employment in other sectors. But we really see that, we start thinking about hybrid and how we work within this environment, that is really an important piece, how we embrace the employee experience. We want to ensure that there's equity when we develop and implement our policies. And so that's really how we see inclusive really fitting into that hybrid work environment. That second piece is agile and engaged. I think we've learned a lot coming out of the pandemic, how we are agile and how we need to be agile. And so when we think about the hybrid work environment, it really helps the government pivot quickly to be able to put like resources and other work that's most important and urgent without permanently relocating employees or having to rehire. We see us having this agility, be able to kind of move around within our own workspaces. When we think about hybrid, we think about, people that are in the office, people that are teleworking, and then in some cases, people that are remote work. So that really helps us think about that as we start shifting. And then, a hybrid work environment, Wendell, also increases employee engagement. And we know that that's, really important when we start thinking about, work-life balance, commuting costs, other things that really relate to how an employee feels about their work. And we know that, engagement and satisfaction really lead to greater retention. So we really look at that as we start thinking about hybrid. And then, of course, the right skills, that's kind of the piece that really lends us to being able to mission accomplishment and being able to go out and recruit and hire the people that we really need to fulfill these missions. And we start thinking about, our current skills and our emerging skills. And so the access to talent is critical as the federal government starts competing with the private sector to hire individuals with these critical skills. We see a lot of high demand positions where we see a lot of fluidity, such as, cyber and STEM positions where people are looking for that kind of that hybrid. What's that right fit for them? And then, when we start thinking about that, we think about where we're going and how it also facilitates sharing of critical skills. And we start thinking, can we upskill? Can we reskill? We know that there's a lot of technology that's coming forward, such as generative AI, that's going to, impact our workforce. And so we want to make sure that we are fluid and agile.
And I want to talk a little bit more about how you put together this future of work plan. It's something that I think that the COVID-19 pandemic kind of reshaped how we think about the work environment. So is that where these ideas really originated, and who were you hearing from, or what were some of the conversations that you had that kind of led to this final guidance from OPM earlier this year?
Yeah, we really engaged with all of our stakeholders. It was really important to us to make sure that what we were identifying was what we're hearing from our stakeholders. So we really had a number of different areas that we met with and that we had people contribute to, from agency stakeholders, agency leaders, to good government groups. We work closely with our Chief Human Capital Officer Council, or CHICO Council. Actually, at the fall forum of last year, the whole focus was on future of work, and that's where we presented our kind of 5 commitments, and then also our 3 pillars. And we spent almost a whole day talking about that, breaking into groups, getting feedback, making sure that it was right, that it was a good fit. So we had a lot of good information from there. We went out, we kind of shared this amongst some other good government groups, got their feedback. And so as we've begun to think about this and think to where we were going, we really felt that it did meet our stakeholders' kind of needs, and we continue to massage it and socialize it. There's also smaller groups, Chico working groups, there's policy hours that we continue to vet it through until we got it to where we felt it was in a good spot.
And, as you're looking to kind of move forward on some of these priorities that are in this vision from OPM, I know that OPM hosts a lot of events or has some resources out there that agencies or federal employees can take advantage of. One of those is these free training sessions on how to thrive in a hybrid work environment. And I know you've had several sessions of these already. I was wondering if you can tell me, what do those look like from the inside? What are you sharing with agencies or federal employees or whoever's attending about, what does that really mean to thrive in a hybrid work environment?
Yeah, we're really excited about the training. This is something that, we had really been hearing from agencies as we were engaging with them through some of the areas I just talked about, was this great need that, for managers and for employees and even executives to better understand how we work, how we thrive, and how we manage in a hybrid work environment. And so OPM actually started developing this training. Again, we were, hearing from our stakeholders, we were including them in the development of it. And we came up with a number of modules within there that we really focused on those different pieces of, performance management. How do we communicate? How are we doing things differently now? We have distributed teams. How do we work through that? What are some of our office etiquettes? What are our norms? What are dress codes? All these questions that managers were starting to have and employees were starting to have. Should I put on my camera? Do I need to put on my camera? When do I come into the office? When I don't come into the office? How do we have performance discussions? How do we make sure that we're equitable when we're talking about assignments and and working on projects? And so all that was like very important to us to include in there. And so those were kind of the modules that we walked through, and we had very interactive sessions. They were very engaged. We did a number of in-person sessions. We did some virtual sessions. This was embraced by our director, who helped kick things off for many of the sessions, gave some opening remarks to really elevate the importance of it and the need for this in the federal government. We also did SES only training, where we invited all SES members to come in, and we really connected that to a lot of what we're doing, what we're seeing on organizational health and organizational performance, and how that all ties together, and how do we really lead in that environment, and how do we thrive in that. And so that's kind of where it came from. And we've trained, I think, over 20,000 people through this. We've had, like I said, the virtual and the in-person sessions, and we have some more coming out. So we felt there was such a need for it, and so many people could say, are you coming to our town? We've been working through the FEBs. When are you coming here? So our team right now is working on a few more in-person sessions and a few more virtual sessions as well.
Yeah, the one thing that really stands out to me from kind of some of the different topics you touched on is communication in a hybrid work environment. Obviously, that's going to look very different whether you're working from home, in the office, or some sort of mix of the two. Can you tell me, more specifically, what does communication really look like in these sorts of work environments where you have this mix? And maybe what are some of the challenges of kind of reaching that good level of communication among different work teams?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and with our thriving in a hybrid work environment training, we also introduced kind of a new leadership model that identified some of the traits. And there were really 5 broad dimensions in there. And communication was, one of those key dimensions. It was communication, resources, inclusion, performance, and connection. And so, we really wanted to focus on that communication and elevate the importance of that. And, we've come up now with new technology and how we're communicating, not only with each other, before we did not have things such as Zoom and Teams where we saw each other and we only had people on the phone, and it was hard to engage and interact, where we saw body language, where we were able to have kind of those face-to-face discussions. So that really opened up kind of a new arena, a new area on how we were working through communication. But it's also, I think, when we start thinking about, how do we communicate, not only the tools and not only the technology, but just the clarity of it. When we start realizing, now we're communicating through performance management in certain areas, and how are we communicating expectations. And I think, part of that, and when we think about what managers are doing, it's really going beyond, and it's having more conversations. It's being more thoughtful about your conversations. We know that, there were different types of people who, reacted differently in the hybrid arena, when some felt isolation, some felt the need to be around other people, some felt they needed greater communication, some felt they needed less communication. So it was really important for managers to be able to understand their employee traits and what worked for them and what was effective, as we start thinking about, long term, is we want to achieve our goals. We want to achieve mission delivery. And so how do we do that? And how do we make sure that we're communicating the expectations? And we're thinking about our kind of our new norms that I just mentioned before. What's that like when we are in the office, when we are on video? If some people are in the office and some are on video, how are we communicating? Are we getting together? Do we have team calls? So that was really an important part. And, even just our whole effective, the way we communicate this within an agency, I think is important too, showing leadership buy-in and how we want to present our policies.
And from the manager's perspective too, I mean, of course, you have communication for everyone, but what is the role of the managers to really set the tone for that? And how do they, I guess, what are some of your recommendations or suggestions for how managers can really have a better handle on, employee meetings or employee engagement, satisfaction, things of that nature?
Yeah, I think, when we think about the manager's role and their leverage point to being able to work with employees and to communicate that, I think that we get back to, well, what is meaningful to them, and what is that employee experience, and how does that employee experience impact our customer experience, which is really kind of where we're going. So, as a manager, we think about all of our kind of communication tools, right? We have email, we have conference calls, we have meetings, we have in-person, we have hybrid, and we think about our performance management, where we're required to do some feedback and some communication. But I think it goes beyond that. I think it's, when managers are communicating, that they have a strategy in place, and they are using all these tools that are available to them, from either from the email or from the in-person or from having Zoom calls. I think it's, we've seen that increase in that technology piece, where now we are starting to be able to communicate directly through face-to-face like we are now. So I think those kind of strategies are important.
Do you maybe have some examples of, either in your own office at OPM or other agencies that you've kind of had discussions with, of, where are agencies seeing success in kind of taking advantage of either the technology or the different communication styles that exist in a hybrid work environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think, from our perspective at OPM, we've had great success, through a lot of the areas that I talked about. We've, been thoughtful about how we upgrade our technology, about how we use our technology, ensuring that, employees have the proper technology at home. We have the proper technology in the office when we're having these meetings, and we're having hybrid meetings, that we're having the upgraded cameras that allow for the full interaction as we're engaging with people that may be remote or maybe virtual. That we're using things such as virtual whiteboards to make sure that, we're inclusive on those things. And then we've seen, from a lot of agencies that, are utilizing technology in their communications, either through tools that they developed. We've seen some workforce planning tools on how they communicate that. I think agencies like NSF and state have been very effective in building some tools that really look at how they're communicating criteria for telework and remote work, and how they're making those determinations. And so I think that transparency is, key as we start thinking about this, that employees understand, what's being expected, what is that criteria that I'm being judged on, and what are the standards. So I think as we continue to move forward, that'll be, ultimately important.
Yeah, and it seems like it is up to each individual agency to kind of set the tone, or each individual team to work through this hybrid environment. And OPM's role is kind of to guide agencies along that path, right? So, you mentioned, or we talked about the training for how to thrive in a hybrid work environment. What other resources does OPM have, or maybe are coming down the line that agencies can take advantage of, or that managers can take advantage of to help them through this new work environment?
Yeah, I think that was really important as we started doing this. Agencies were really looking to OPM for guidance and for policy and just for updates on how do we now work in this environment. You know, when we first came out with this, we introduced a new website, a future of the work website that where we started really having these discussions and started building out some of our policies out there, some of our guidance, some of our FAQs. That website's actually going under kind of a rebuild, so we're excited to see what that looks like. But some of the things that we issued, were telework FAQs, were remote work FAQs. How do we hire in this? What are some of the things that we do? We issued a workforce planning guide. We issued a foresight guidebook that helped agencies think about how they do workforce planning, how we start identifying MCOs. What does that future look like as we start planning for the future? We conduct a lot of informational sessions with agencies and with Chicos. We hold policy hours where we bring in the Chicos and we discuss specific policy questions that they have, provide them feedback if there's needed, if there's updated guidance. We're currently working on some more guidance and policy that we've been in discussions with Chicos around more of work hours, maxi flex, and some of these other things that are important to them. We're getting feedback. We're able to deliver to them. We have work groups, we have Chico working groups that we vet this through. And so we want to continue to make sure that we're timely and we're responsive. And, policy and guidance is one of our 5 commitments that are outlined in that March 7th memo. So we want to make sure that we are reactive to that and that we are working closely with agencies to be able to get out this kind of information.
Yeah, I think you actually, Jason, bring up a really interesting point here about, you mentioned maxi flex or work hours with all of this. And, the hybrid work environment changes a lot of things. It doesn't only change where you work, but in a lot of cases, it can change your hours or how you work or how you break up your day. Have you seen agencies kind of taking that path or offering that path to employees more now than they had in the past?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's, really been critical as we've moved into this new area to make sure that, we have these flexibilities available to us and that we're using them. Employees and agencies have been accustomed to working a certain way, when we were all working from home. And now that we're into the office, it's a shift. But in some cases, we still have these commitments to our children, or our life goes on, or taking care of other things that we may need to flex in and we may need to flex out. And so we have really strongly encouraged agencies to be able to use these flexibilities. We've seen some agencies that have really embraced this and have really thought kind of outside the box. I think DHS and Energy come to mind on some really forward thinking on policies and how do we ensure that we are being flexible in what we do and that we're managing employees. Because I think work-life balance now, is so key, and that as we transition to more, in-person and meaningful in-person work, that we still continue to think about that and realize that, lives are still going on and we're still continuing to work forward. And, we want to make sure that we are able to retain employees but also to meet our mission and to make sure that we're achieving, our goals and objectives.
Right. And, it's something to keep in mind in all of this too, is that there's this broader context of, the workforce nationwide, not just the federal workforce, but you're also competing against the private sector when trying to recruit or retain employees. And, is that something that is maybe made more challenging, or what are some of the, I guess, challenges of having that broader recruitment environment and moving forward to this future of work at the same time?
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic as we start thinking about that, and we start thinking about where we've been and where we're going. And we were accustomed maybe to a little bit of where we were. We were all in the office, we were doing our things, and we kind of shifted a little bit to remote work and increased telework. And we saw some benefits of that, but we've also seen where we may have been lacking some collaboration, some innovation opportunity with people in the office, and kind of that synergy. So I think we're trying to strike that balance, but we also realize, that we are competing with private sector and, with other entities out there that may have different policies. I think what we are starting to see, though, is even in the private sector, we're starting to see a shift to some more in-person work. So I think that kind of aligns with our thinking, but we want to make sure that, we are the federal government, that we want to be an employer of choice, that, some of those things that we outlined in our future of work, the three things that I talked about will kind of lead to that, making sure, that we are agile, that we are engaged, that we are inclusive, that, people can see themselves working here. We have great reach, great stretch across the nation where, we can reach a lot of maybe, underserved areas, and we can offer opportunities to people that they may not be able to offer in other areas. And it allows us to maybe recruit for some of those really hard to find skills that where others may be limited either by, geographical or other limitations. And as we think about being flexible and being hybrid, that these are the kind of policies that I think people are looking for and that help us, stay competitive with the private sector.
Yeah, that what you just said, it really reminds me of the inclusive aspect of the OPM's future of work idea there. Is that kind of what your thinking was for the inclusive part of that?
Yep. Yeah, that's how we started thinking about that. And, we were really thinking about, how we do business and how we recruit, and kind of, how I talked a little bit up front. We want people to be able to see themselves working at the federal government, no matter who they are, no matter their age, their gender, their education level, their background, wherever they're from, that I could see myself fitting in. And then how do we achieve that? How do we have that vision so that when they come work for the federal government, they do see that they are representative, of the people that we serve. They can find their niche in the federal government. They can, work on policy that they want to work on, or important issues that they want to work on. And I think having that inclusivity and thinking about that and making sure that we're equitable in our policies are really important. And so that really, I think, again, gives us a little bit of advantage. And as we start thinking through that, and, and now really, what does that pillar look like? I think will really be important as we start thinking, future forward.
Right. And, another thing that comes to mind here, and that you just mentioned a minute ago, you were talking about the idea of striking a balance between in-person and telework for federal employees. And, this is something that we've seen a lot of agencies start to do is, say, hey, we're going to return to the office at least part of the time. But of course, there's still the emphasis on, making sure that hybrid work is still available. Do you have any, I guess, strategies for maybe agencies who are trying to deal with this return to office, or, how is that vision playing out, or what do you think that's going to look like coming up?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an important kind of aspect of the kind of the new work environment as we start thinking about that. And we know that, it is important to have this, in-person collaboration, and, to have these kind of innovative sessions. And so, we really kind of take that to heart. And, in the earlier memo, about meaningful in-person work, that when people are in the office, that they understand, kind of how that benefits the, not only them, the organization, the work that they do, the people that they serve. We have people, that are in various jobs that, have various contact, various, we have frontline workers, we have people that are in offices, that deal with the public, Social Security, VA, they're dealing with people with benefits. We have frontline workers, TSA, Border Patrol, people have not necessarily ever been in that telework or remote work, that have always been there. But then how do we start making sure that, that they have some balance as well? And then all the people that, have, maybe, knowledge type jobs where they're coming in, they're writing policy, they're doing, work, that it's also understanding why they're coming in, that benefit to that. And so I think it is a transition, but a lot of, as we've been talking to managers and talking to agencies, we want it to be thoughtful while they're coming in. Think about if you typically have weekly meetings, that, you would schedule that meeting when people are in the office. Do we want to have, a core day on one day a month where everybody's coming in, for that day where we, have seen people that we haven't seen before. Because even as we start thinking about telework and, the hybrid, we still have people coming in on different days, whether they're coming in 2 days or 3 days a week. They still may not always see all their colleagues. So be thoughtful about that, as we start planning these sessions and we start having, strategy sessions or team meetings or team events on what that looks like when they're in the office, and that we do make, time for collaboration.
Do you see that as something that might be a challenge moving forward, just, with different work schedules, different types of positions? There's a lot of factors at play
Yeah.
when you think about the role of meaningful in-person work versus working from home or hybrid work. Do you see that as something that can be a challenge for managers to kind of figure out or employees to figure out?
Yeah, I think it'll be an adjustment. I mean, I think that it'll be an adjustment, but I think it'll be important. And I think, we'll kind of find our way a little bit as we go, and what works and what doesn't work. I know, at OPM, we're, coming back into the office a little bit more, and how we work through that and how we start, ensuring that we are having this meaningful work and that people just aren't sitting in a cubicle, on Zoom for 8 hours a day and then going home. I think that we need as managers and we need as, agencies to make sure that we have policies that are reflective and make sure that we're thoughtful about how we're engaging with our employees. And we know that there's going to be a shift and that there will be a little adjustment period, but I don't know if it'll be a challenge. I think it'll be kind of rethinking about how we do some of our business and reimagining, how we work when we're in the office. And, we used to work this way, and, we've had a lot of success. And I think it's getting back to that, and rethinking what worked, reminding ourselves what worked and what we did when we were in the office. But, we still will have some people that are remote, and making sure that they're engaged as well, too.
Right. And, this is something, if you think about it, there have been a lot of different iterations over the past few years of what does the federal workforce look like, right? During the pandemic, obviously, you had a huge spike in remote work or telework, people working from home. Now we're seeing this shift back to the office, at least a little bit, with this meaningful work. Do you see, in the future, there being any other shift, any other ideas for what the federal workforce might look like, 5, 10 years from now? Do you think it would be vastly different from what the changes that we're seeing right now?
I wish I had my crystal ball with me, but yeah, no, I think, I think we're always thinking about that. At OPM, we've stood up a foresight team, and foresight is really that kind of methodology, or that, thinking of doing scenario planning for that future focus, for that 10 years down the line, and what that's going to look like. And, I mean, I think, many things are definitely hard to predict, but if we look at where we're going and we use kind of, some of the methodology that, is in that kind of foresight realm, I think it helps us narrow and helps us, hone in a little bit into what that may look like. We know that technology is emerging every day. We know that we have generative AI now that, is quickly kind of, in the last couple of months is really taking on a new life of its own. And how's that going to impact our workforce? And this is something that just happened in a couple of months. So when we start thinking about 5, 10 years down the line, we know there's going to be impacts. We know the world's going to look a lot different than it does today. I think it's, how we prepare for that and how do we do workforce planning when we start thinking about that, that we're not just narrow and thinking about, the skills that we need now, but thinking about what are those future skills. We know that AI is out there. OPM just released our AI competencies to help agencies start thinking about that. And how do I recruit for those skills? Are we in line with academia on what's coming out of colleges and universities? Are we in line with those types of skills, and are they aligned with the jobs that we need, and how will we progress? So I think as we start thinking about that, workforce planning, foresight planning is really going to be critical in what we do. And so that we don't stay static, and so we don't stay reactive, that we're really forward thinking. And how do we get to that point besides just the numbers that we need now?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that really kind of hones back to the agile aspect of the OPM, that future of work guidance, and how can you kind of adapt to this changing work environment as things change, and just not knowing, what's coming next, right?
Yeah, we really think about that and think about, if we really start thinking future focused and agile, and we really start thinking, big picture and maybe things that we don't have in place now, but, we've thought about, is there a way to, think about, utilizing things such as a gig economy, right? Are we able to bring people in for short-term assignments? Are we able to use exchange programs with the private sector, things that, sometimes even have been tried in the past, but we weren't quite ready for. I know that, there's a couple agencies that are trying these exchange programs. They've had great success with them, where an employee will go into a private sector company, learn a lot and come back. And, are we using things like open opportunities, another way that we can be agile and that we can move throughout government and work on, important projects that maybe we don't have time to hire for, or we don't have time to go out and go through the whole process, but we may be able to bring on somebody, short term or one day a week that can help us. So I think it's starting to think differently about that, and how do we utilize a lot of our resources that are out there, a lot of our flexibilities, term appointments, reinstatement, bringing people back. So I think that, will come more and more prevalent as we start moving forward and we start utilizing some of our resources. I know that, there's a lot of skills assessments that go on, and we're looking at our workforce and looking at where our skills are and our knowledge base, and how do we tap into that? Do we have, maybe a tiger team within an agency that has certain skills that can help, that could be called upon? These are, some of my thoughts, but I think it's where we may be going.
Yeah, and that's another interesting point that you bring up as well. This idea of skills gaps in the federal government. That's something that we've discussed in the past too. Can do you think that those gaps are going to shift at all, or what are some of the ones that exist right now, and why are they particularly challenging for the federal workforce?
Yeah, skills gaps has been something that, we've been taking on for quite a while, and has been, in my area since for quite a while. And we've been working closely with agencies on how do we close those gaps? How do I identify those gaps? OPM has come out, with a whole kind of methodology that's out on our website. It starts with like root cause analysis, looking at that, action planning, interventions to how we do that. And so I think there's, a bunch of different gaps where we think about, is it a competency gap? Is it a hiring gap? And so I think agencies have made, great progress. They've, for most part, have embraced this methodology. We've come up with, an assessment tool that helps look at, what may be high risk. We look at a number of different elements and help agencies identify where that high risk gap may be and how do we focus on that. And we start thinking about workforce data and how that really plays into that. So I think it's really important that we're cognizant of the gaps. I think, we have a number of gaps, right now, but agencies are working towards those. The PMA is, extremely focused on that, and we think about that priority one under, empowering and leveraging the strengthening the federal workforce, and some of the priority metrics that came out. Closing hiring and staffing gaps is a priority metric that, agencies have embraced. It's being tracked out there on performance.gov, and agencies are making great progress. And so we can look at some of where those focus areas are. But as we just talked about a minute ago, I think it's also the gaps that maybe we can't see yet, the gaps that are coming down, those new gaps, those new skills gaps, and skills that haven't been identified or just starting to be identified. How do we fill those? How do we start planning for those before we get behind and we realize that we don't have those and we need them?
And, Jason, we've covered a lot of ground here. We've talked about skills gaps, technology, the hybrid workforce, performance management, work-life balance, all this sort of stuff. If there was one thing that you want people to take away from this conversation, what would that be?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have covered a lot, and we've talked a lot. At the end of the day, it's mission delivery and delivering on mission, and we have a lot of policies. We have a lot of memos out there that talk about how we do that and how we look at that. I think, we've really moved into making some really data informed decisions. I think, we've talked a lot about data throughout this conversation. I think as agencies think about that and think about key metrics, key performance indicators, using data to make decisions. OPM just released our data strategy. We have a whole new data portal out there where We've released 3 dashboards. We have some more dashboards coming, and be able to use that data to inform our workforce planning, where we can start saying, this is where we need to go. We need these workforce capabilities. We've talked about inclusion. We've talked about what our workforce looks like. Does our workforce look like the way that we want it to look like? How do we improve the recruitment? So I think all those things, and probably in a nutshell, is a data-driven workforce planning model that gets us to mission delivery, if I were to kind of sum it all up.
Great. Well, Jason, thank you so much for joining me. It's been a really great conversation and I appreciate it.
Absolutely. I enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully we can talk in the future.
And Jason Barke is Deputy Associate Director for Strategic Workforce Planning at the Office of Personnel Management. I'm your moderator, Drew Friedman, and you're watching Federal News Network. Now let me send you back to the studio for more on Workplace Reimagined.